Aeroflot Flight 593 suddenly crashes into mountains in Russia, and 63 passengers along with 12 crew members lose their lives. When they check what happened, they find out the plane didn't crash because of a technical problem. It happened because a kid was playing with the plane and made a mistake. But kids aren't allowed to fly the plane, and they're not even supposed to enter the cockpit of the plane. So, how was this kid flying the plane? How did he manage to get into the cockpit? And how did this tragic incident unfold? Let's delve into the details. That day of March 23, 1994. Around 11 p.m. at night, at Sheremetyevo International Airport in Russia, 63 passengers were on board the Airbus A310-304 aircraft. This Flight 593 of the Russian airline Aeroflot was supposed to travel from the capital city Moscow in Russia to Kai-Tak Airport in Hong Kong. Talking about the plane used in Aeroflot Flight 593, the aircraft, an Airbus A310-304, was leased by Russia. The Airbus A310-304 had its first flight on September 11, 1991. By the time it became part of Flight 593, the aircraft was already 4 years old. However, up until that point, there had been neither any technical faults nor any other issues observed with the aircraft. The captain of Aeroflot Flight 593 was Andrei Viktorovich Danilov, who had 9,500 hours of flying experience. And in those 950 hours, he had only flown the Airbus A310 aircraft. So, flying Flight 593 was like child's play for the captain. It was as easy as pie for him. In addition to the captain, the first officer in command of this aircraft was Igor Vasilyevich Piskaryov, boasting 5,885 hours of flight time experience. And since this was going to be a long flight, lasting a whopping 8 hours and 15 minutes, there was also a relief captain on board, Yaroslav Vladimirovich Kudrinsky. He was traveling with his family. Talking about their experience, Yaroslav Vladimirovich Kudrinsky had a flying experience of 8,940 hours. Now, with such experienced pilots, a plane crash happening, and that too due to a child's mistake? It was indeed a colossal lapse in attentiveness. But how did this happen? Let me explain. So, it takes about an hour for all passengers to board the plane. During this time, the crew, pilots, and airport staff complete all the checks that need to be done before takeoff. Here, it's worth mentioning that out of the 63 passengers on the plane, 40 were Russian. Among these 40, 30 passengers were airline employees and their families. The remaining 23 passengers were foreign businessmen who had come to Russia in pursuit of economic opportunities. Among the 30 passengers who were family members of airline employees, there were 2 children, Eldar and Yana, the children of relief pilot Kudrinsky. Eldar, who was 15 years old at the time, and Yana, who was around 13 years old, were both traveling on an international flight for the first time. Anyway, around 1:12 a.m., the plane takes off from Moscow. And shortly after takeoff, the pilot engages the plane's autopilot system. For your information, in the autopilot system, the plane maintains a constant speed, and it gradually climbs to a stable altitude. Therefore, during this time, the pilot doesn't have to do anything special to keep the plane flying. Now, everything was going smoothly, and the plane was perfectly stable. It was during this time that Kudrinsky's children insisted on coming into the cockpit. They were curious to see how the plane was flown. Although it's usually not allowed for children to enter the cockpit, Kudrinsky wanted to fulfill his children's curiosity. So, he brought them into the cockpit. It was okay until they entered, but afterwards, the children insisted on sitting in the pilot's seat. Since the plane was on autopilot at that time, Kudrinsky, keeping everything in check, allowed them to sit in the pilot's seat. First, at 12:43 a.m., his 13-year-old daughter sits in the pilot's seat. As mentioned, the plane was on autopilot at that time, but Kudrinsky, through his facial expressions, makes it seem as if his daughter is the one flying the plane. The little girl, delighted, gets up from the seat. After Yana, around 12:51, Kudrinsky's son takes the pilot's seat. However, he was not about to be as foolish as his sister. As soon as he sits in the seat, he applies full force to the control column, causing the plane to switch from autopilot mode to manual mode for 30 seconds. This meant that now the entire control of the plane was in the hands of 15-year-old Eldar. However, when the flight switched from autopilot to manual control, an alert light indicator also turned on. But due to negligence, none of the pilots, or co-pilots inside the cockpit paid attention to this alert at that time. A few seconds later, Eldar observes that the plane is turning in the right direction. Subsequently, the flight path indicator gradually begins to show a new path for the flight. Now, as the flight was continuously turning, the flight path indicator suggests making a 180 degrees turn. This indication confuses the pilots. They couldn't understand how all of this was happening because, up until that point, they were not aware that the plane had switched from autopilot to manual mode. In this confusion, they waste 9 precious seconds. During this time, the plane nosedives from a 45 degrees angle to almost a 90 degrees angle, descending rapidly. Now, because the gravity force was very high and the plane's direction was downward, the plane rapidly loses altitude. Due to the high gravity force, reaching the control column becomes extremely difficult for the first officer. At this time, in the cockpit, the only one with both hands on the control column was the child. In the midst of panic, Kudrinsky instructs Eldar and the other pilot to take a left turn first and then to turn to the right. Meanwhile, the autopilot is also attempting to stabilize the plane. The ailerons of the plane were not under the control of the autopilot. So, they increase the thrust to try to lift the nose of the plane upward. While this action lifts the nose of the plane, the autopilot is unable to control it. As a result, the plane, while lifting its nose upward, becomes completely vertical. At this moment, an indicator light on the plane's screen illuminates, signaling the pilots about the complete disengagement of the autopilot. But before the pilots could process this alert, the display screen of the plane goes blank. In this situation, to bring the plane from a vertical to a horizontal position, the Airbus A310-304's automatic system initiates lowering the nose. Meanwhile, as soon as the force of gravity diminishes, Kudrinsky quickly moves his son Eldar aside and swiftly sits back in his seat. However, due to the lack of specific control in the automatic system, the plane is unable to maintain stability and begins to nosedive again, descending rapidly. This time, the co-pilot, Piskaryov, attempts to pull the plane out of the nosedive. However, his mistake lies in applying more force than necessary, causing the plane to once again straighten its nose upward and become completely vertical in the air. But this time, the plane doesn't stop here. Instead, it goes completely inverted and starts rapidly descending in a corkscrew dive. The pilots make every effort to regain control, and they achieve some success to a certain extent. However, by that time, the plane's altitude has dropped significantly. In other words, recovering from this fall has become impossible. As a result, the plane crashes after colliding with the Kuznetsk-Alatau mountain chain. And in the blink of an eye, all 75 people on board the plane lose their lives. After this crash, many technical experts tried to understand the situation and wanted to know what a pilot should do if faced with a similar situation in the future. According to their calculations, when the plane initially took a turn, at that time, the pilots should have released the control column of the plane. Because doing so would allow aerodynamic principles to take effect, and the plane would automatically return to its designated path after some time. After this crash, newspapers and people worldwide began questioning Aeroflot, stating that children entering the cockpit was prohibited, yet Aeroflot pilots allowed their children in. They questioned why such permission was given. Initially, Aeroflot completely denied these allegations. But later, when the investigation took place and the conversation from the black box in the cockpit was decoded, it was found that both of Kudrynsky's children were present in the cockpit, and they had also taken control of the plane. After this conclusive evidence, Aeroflot had to accept that handing over control of the plane to the children was indeed the cause of the crash of this flight. After this incident, many different web series and dramas have been made about it, with the Canadian TV series Mayday being the most popular among them. In the third and sixth seasons of Mayday, this incident was featured under the titles Kid in the Cockpit and Who's Flying the Plane? Additionally, the novelist Michael Crichton has also incorporated this event into his novel, Airframe. So, that was the astonishing story of the Aeroflot Flight 593 disaster. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you liked our hard work, please click on the subscribe button for more new videos. Your support means a lot to us, and we appreciate you.